Well, birth rates are falling, fewer people are having children, and those who do are having less. Some call it a demographic crisis, especially on the political right. The same conservatives who rail against big government are now calling for it to step in and fix what they see as a population collapse, which is interesting. But is more government ever really the answer? Our guest today says no, and she's here to explain why. Hannah Cox is a political commentator, a writer, and activist, and the president of Based Politics, a national media nonprofit dedicated to advancing pro-liberty, free market ideas for the next generation. She's a fierce advocate for individual freedom and women's rights. Hannah consistently chooses principle over party. Her work has been published in FoxNews.com, Newsweek, The Hill, and more, and she's a regular face on Fox News, Newsmax, and News Nation. But she's helped drive major policy reforms across the country, from repealing the death penalty in 3 states to expanding school choice and protecting free speech. She also hosts the Hannah Cox Show on YouTube, where she tackles politics and culture from a liberty-first perspective. Hannah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim. It's great to be with you.
You're kind of an anomaly to me a little bit, because looking at this, like repealing the death penalty, it seems like obviously would you say you come from, the right? Are you on the right politically?
I come from the right. I was raised Republican. My dad's a Southern Baptist pastor. I was homeschooled. I always joke I was trad before they coined the term. And and I considered myself a Republican most of my life, but I always had these breaks with the party and with the ideology. Even as a little kid, politics was very present in my house. And because I was homeschooled, my mom likes politics. Like, I was very informed as a kid about political ideologies. And I think because I really took their instructions. They believed in individual liberty. They believed in capitalism. But I think my parents sort of had a knee-jerk surface reaction to those terms. Like, yes, we support them. They didn't often dig into the weeds or necessarily pay attention to the policies Republicans were pushing to see if they actually matched those ideologies. And I was just a weird kid, and I did. And so even at a young age, there were all of these like inconsistencies for me, particularly around individual liberty, where I just didn't really think the party kept its word on that. And as I aged and I started getting even more involved in politics and really seeing the policies that were being proposed and often passed, it really caused me to break with the party. So I consider myself politically homeless, but very principled. I know exactly the ideology I believe. I think it's a consistent ideology. It just unfortunately doesn't have a home or much political power at the moment in the States.
Okay, and we're going to get to that just in a second, because I do want to talk about obviously birth rates and women's rights and all of these things and how they relate to the right. But are you all you're with Brad Palumbo, right? With his on Based? Is that you guys do that together?
Yeah. So Brad and I started Based Politics together a number of years ago, in large part because we wanted to make content around the ideas that we share. And again, we just didn't really find that not only do they not have a home in the political parties, but there's not really a lot of institutions that are, at least in the media world, that are consistently backing those kinds of ideas. So we sort of felt that if we wanted those jobs, we would have to build them. And we launched a show together, which then turned into Based Politics, which is a nonprofit that we've run together since 2022.
Yeah, I've talked to Brad many times, and one thing that I think the theme there, and we're going to get into this. I think it's also a theme in the conversation we're about to have, which is the right. Sometimes, like, they'll have some really great ideas, and I'm seeing this right now when it comes to even just Mamdani becoming the Democratic nominee. I mean, a lot of Republicans are like losing their minds over this, and they're Charlie Kirk, coming out and basically saying, now I'm not just against illegal immigration, I'm now against legal immigration. Now he's like, I don't even want legal immigration anymore. It starts off with a good idea, and then it kind of goes to this extreme. And one of the things with Brad that I talked to him about before was, like with trans rights, right? It was like, okay, yeah, the left went so far crazy with this stuff that obviously the right had to push back and be like, okay, reel it in. Let's get back to normal. Let's talk about real biology. Men are men, women are women. This doesn't, if you want to identify, if you want to, whatever it is you want to, but that's, we need to get back to science and reality. But then you see a lot of people joining in on that, saying, yeah, I agree, people that maybe come from the left. But then the right takes it a step further and says, okay, now I'm against gays, right? Just in general. Like, it starts with trans, and then it kind of seems to reel into, now I'm just against gays and gay marriage. And now let's go ahead and start to unravel that. And I'm starting to see that, like with the women's rights issues, we're starting to see, the trad wife trend going, I think, in a direction that is, this is just not going to be good for the Republican Party to try to go to do the very thing that I think people keep accusing them of, which is becoming kind of Handmaid's Tale, right? Like we're getting back into Handmaid's Tale territory where it's like, okay, instead of just being against common sense principles, they just take it to the next level. And now they're like, now we don't even want women to work at all. That's what I'm starting to hear online. It's like, now you shouldn't even be working. You're not really a trad wife if you're working at all. Or you should be just at home pumping out babies. And that gets to our birth rate conversation, because a lot of people, I feel like on the right, are starting to push this whole agenda of we need more babies and women should basically be cut off from birth control. Women should be cut off from education. Women shouldn't be allowed to work because they should be at home pumping out kids. Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing in that trend?
I am. Yeah, and it's very shocking to me because, I grew up defending the Republican Party from accusations of racism and sexism, and I was always like, that's not true, And I didn't even consider myself a feminist throughout most of my life because I also felt like the left was going too far in that regard, and I had sort of a natural aversion to that, and I also just felt like we'd arrived. Women are equal in this country. We have equal rights. The work is really done when it comes at least to the legal system. Maybe there's cultural things we need to focus on. But as a whole, I thought the entire movement was sort of going off a cliff. And now what I'm seeing happen, you're correctly identifying it, it's horseshoe theory repeating over and over, where the left goes to one extreme and then the right starts to mirror it to the other when it comes to women's rights. And I think the birth rate conversation, per usual, you see this in politics all the time, where they use kids and babies to drive a larger agenda item because they're sympathetic. And so you saw the left go to the extremes of, there's overpopulation, and also patriarchy is what makes people want to get married and have kids, and it's a bad thing. And so you saw this correction happening, I think justifiably so, on the right. But now it really is starting to move in a direction where I do hear people actually attacking women's rights. I saw the editor of The Federalist just yesterday saying that a woman in Congress who has a baby should not be able to be in office and should go home and essentially get back in the kitchen, which is just shocking to me to see laid bare like that.
Yeah, it's so disheartening, to be honest, to see just when I had hope for the right, just when I thought, oh, here's the party of common sense, they want free speech, they don't want mandates, they're talking, they're pushing back on the lunacy of the left. And just when you think, okay, this is where the common sense people are going, it just took a minute. It wasn't even that long. I don't feel like we even had room to breathe. It was just once the election happened, I feel like once Trump actually won and got into office, it was that they're emboldened because they won, rather than trying to continue. When you don't have the election, when Joe Biden was in office, there was an attempt to bring in all the independents, to bring in people that felt disenfranchised from the left, people who were feeling politically homeless, who had been on the left, people like myself who had been mostly on the left. And then COVID pushed me out. And then then all these other loony ideas pushed me out. It was just like, okay, you guys have just gone full on crazy. And then I'm like, oh, but people on the right are actually starting to make sense. And they're actually, or they, their ideas make sense. This is I found a new political home, it looks like. Only within months. We're not, how far? We're 6 months in to Trump taking office. It hasn't even been 6 years. It's only been 6 months. And 6 months later, we're starting to see all of this insanity of, I've been fighting with people online. I cannot believe I'm even seeing what I'm reading, that it's growing the real white, I wouldn't say white supremacy. I would call it white nationalism, right? The real trend towards, because there's a difference between white supremacy and white nationalism. Right. These aren't people who think they're genetically better or anything necessarily because of their race. So they don't have a superiority issue. They just want to live in communities with only other white people. And they think that America should be only white. And they want to push back against, immigration from people from anywhere else other than white nations, European nations. They want to kind of maintain that. And that is growing. And this whole, women get back in the kitchen thing is growing. And now, it's just, so let's talk about women.
It's a huge driver of it.
Yeah, let's talk about the trad wife trend and the birth rate conversation, because whenever there's alarm being sounded, right, that's when hysteria, and then people go into overcorrection, and they are sounding the alarm about birth rate. But what is the issue with birth rate? I mean, since my dad has been alive, he's like 75 years old. Since he's been alive, the population of the earth, I think, has tripled in his lifetime. So
Yes.
should we slow that? I mean, are we really having a problem here?
We're not, because you're so smart to call this out. I see so few people catch this, but the entire premise that they are running with is that we are not hitting replacement rates. But replacement rates mean that we have to keep up with or expand based on the number of people who are currently here, which you're correct to observe is more people than we've ever had before. And there's nothing to suggest that we have to continue to grow and to expand the population. I often see people on the left, misdiagnose this too. They'll say, oh, capitalism requires an endless growth. And no, it doesn't. The only thing that requires endless growth, endless population growth, is the current government structure that we've created, because it's a pyramid scheme. So they do need to keep expanding the base because they want to keep growing the government and paying for all of these programs within it. And so that's really the actual Trojan horse here. All of this birth rate decline discussion comes back to the fact that politicians realize they don't want to do the politically unpopular thing and actually reform and cut government spending and cut government programs. And so in order to keep afloat, they need an ever expanding base of people. And then many people point to the fact that in the US, while our birth rate has declined, it has not collapsed. It's not anywhere close to that. And also, even the decline can be matched with immigration. You kind of see the mask fall, because the number of people that are in this white nationalist kind of camp do not want to see the potential issues that could come about. And there are some valid issues that could come about with a declining population, such as trying to make sure we have enough people to care for the baby boomers as they retire and age, but they don't want to address those limited problems that have a time constraint on them. It's not an ongoing problem. We have a really large generation that's about to retire and age. We have to address that, and that can easily be addressed with AI, with technology, and with immigration. But they don't want that, because they truly do believe that in order to preserve their culture and Western values, that you need a predominantly white population. And so the entire thing about how women need to stop going to school, they need to get married young, they need to start having babies, is because in their minds, the wrong people are having babies. And I think that that is really grotesque. And I think that it's something that I've had to face, as somebody who has a lot of friends and family still on the right, and who, again, has spent a lot of time defending these camps from accusations of racism and sexism. To me, it has become inarguable that those are driving mentalities within this discussion right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear that these others who are different from non-white countries, and of course the white countries we're not getting a lot of immigrants in from white countries, because they're also dealing with a population decline. I mean, Europe is seeing the same issue. So really, which countries are having all the babies? I mean, you've got China with a ton of people, even though they've had a forced population decline for a long time. And then you've got India. You have a lot of kids being born in the Middle East. Those families have, a typical Middle Eastern family, I think, is a family of 6. In the United States, it's like a family of 4, like maybe mom, dad, and 2 kids was kind of the thing. And I think in the Middle East, it's always a family of 6, mom, dad, and 4 kids. And that's like the minimum. So in India, I think it's a similar situation. So people are getting really nervous about people coming in from Middle East and South Asia flooding into the United States. Brown people, dark people, different culture. People assimilate, though. I mean, all you have to do, I'm half Vietnamese. People will assimilate if they're given the opportunity to assimilate, and they'll be just as American as anybody. But, I mean, what do you think? Like, Elon Musk is one person who's very much driving this conversation, and he's popping out kids with, I don't even know how many women now, as if this is the answer. Make a bunch of babies that you're not the dad to any of them, because you've got so many baby mamas. Like, as if that's not going to create a generation of problems, right? What is it that you're seeing?
Elon is very smart in some areas, but I think we have to remember that just because you're smart in some areas does not mean you're smart in every area. And I think unquestionably what he's doing is unethical. I actually find it very demeaning towards men. This kind of assertion that the only thing kids require from a father figure is money, and not to have the father in the home and actually present in their life. We have tons of data to refute that and to show that the outcomes are actually pretty dire when you remove a present father figure in the home. And so I think he's incorrect in his assessment about how severe the birth rate decline is to begin with. I think he's fixated on it, and I think he's taking really drastic means to address it that do not compute. A lot of the data we have around the declining birth rate right now is actually pretty positive when you start to consider the reasons why people used to have so many kids. It's because a lot of them died in childhood. Because they needed child labor to work their farms and run the businesses. And also parents were not as invested in their kids. And so we had a lot more unwanted kids, a lot of kids who had a lot of neglect. All of those issues with unwanted kids show up down the road in society, in criminality, in abuse, in addiction. These are things society ends up paying for.
What kind of measures are you hearing Republicans say they want the government to take in order to address this?
Well, there's a wide span of measures. They range from somewhat sane yet failed ideas that have been tried in other countries to, of course, very extreme anti-liberty, anti-women agenda items. But to talk about the ones that I think are more in the public normal discourse, they've talked about things like paying for IVF for everybody. They've discussed programs where you pay women to have babies. Trump literally mentioned a $5,000 baby bonus if you procreate. They've talked about things that are often left-wing agenda items like paid parental leave and free daycare. And the thing about all of those suggestions thus far is, first and foremost, they've been tried in many other countries, particularly many Europe countries. And what they've found in the studies is that they've never made even a marginal difference in actually ticking up the birth rate. If anything, they've led to further decline. Like in Spain, when they studied parental leave amongst men, they found that after the parental leave with the first baby, the men were far less likely to have more kids or want to procreate further because they realized how much of a work burden having kids actually is. When you force men to participate in actually taking care of their kids, they don't want as many kids, it turns out, which is not shocking. And so those programs have not worked. They would not work here. They would simply increase the actual reasons I think people are not wanting as many kids, which is economic stability, not having a certainty that your kids will have a better life than you will have, the expectations and requirements that kids have to be a 24/7 job. This is one thing I've noticed since acquiring 2 stepkids is the opinions around parenting right now are really drastic compared to what I grew up with, where my mom had 4 kids, we were homeschooled, but we did school for 2 hours a day, and then we were out roaming. I mean, I had found a job at age 10 working under the table in a local store for Beanie Babies. I was riding my bike down there and running the cash register and getting paid in Beanie Babies. She didn't know where I was. You would go to jail for that now. I mean, we hear about parents getting arrested for literally letting their kids walk across the street. I suggested to my husband one time, why can't the girls just ride their bikes around the neighborhood? We're in the suburbs. And he was like, crazy. So the expectation that you have to be pretty much consumed by parenthood is making a lot of people not want to step into those roles, or at the very least, it's making them want to have fewer kids, which again, I would suggest is not a problem because we have more research showing that right now, parents spend 50% more time with their kids than they did a generation ago. So they are having fewer kids, but they are investing more heavily in those kids. Those kids will likely have better outcomes. They will have a higher quality of life. We'll see fewer unwanted kids in society and thus fewer of those problems that are often associated with kids who grow up being neglected. And lastly, we'll see less of a drain on the state because we as taxpayers will be expected to pay for fewer kids whose parents are dropping the ball.
What do we do about the boomers, though? I think that's the biggest push for, we got to have more kids because, we're going to go bankrupt trying to pay for Medicare and, just caring for the old people. There's just so many of them. What do you think is a solution to that problem? I mean, in France, we've seen the pushback. They tried to raise the retirement age. They just said, okay, you just have to work a couple more years because we can't afford to support you. And have you retire it. I think there was 62 or something. They wanted to move it up to 64. And they had a freaking revolt over it. So in the United States, I can only imagine if they said we're raising the retirement age from 65 to 67, people are going to revolt. They're going to revolt. So, I mean, what would be the solution to that problem, do you think?
They already have revolted, and I have a lot of frustrations with this generation that I talk about a lot. There's a lot of entitlement. If you really think about retirement as a concept, it didn't exist until the 1930s. And even when they did initially put Social Security in place in the States, the average life expectancy was around 60, 61, and they made the requirements, I think, 63 or 64. They didn't plan on most people living to even obtain it, much less living for 15, 20, 30 years on it. And so obviously this scheme is no longer working because the average life expectancy now is somewhere in the like mid to late 70s for men and women. People are, it's unsustainable. And on top of that, it has given people the perception in the States that they don't have to also save supplementary income for their retirement, right? They have this expectation that Social Security will be enough. And so we see with the aging boomer population, they don't have a retirement. It's something like 50% of them do not have any other retirement saved. So this is actually drastic. It is a huge problem. This is going to be a tremendous cost on society. My generation and younger generations are already fed up with the boomers for everything they've done politically and economically to set this country back, to enrich themselves and hurt the generations coming after them. And so when we talk about the birth rate decline, boomers share a lot of responsibility for that because they've created an environment where their kids feel like they can't even get their first foot on the first rung of the ladder, much less start creating kids that they then have to take care of. And this is yet another example of that, because that burden of taking care of them is going to fall on us, both in our personal lives and when it comes to the government and the financial responsibility of it. So I think this is the most important conversation when it comes to this issue that we're facing. We have to be able to address this generation and the problems that they are going to continue to create. Fortunately, there are easy solutions to this. Again, I'm very excited and very bullish on tech and on AI. I think this is a good thing. I think it is going to decrease the number of people that we have to have working in society over time. That's going to lead to higher quality of life. So that can be used to address some of these things in the very near future. And I think there's going to be a lot of things presenting themselves over the next decade alone that could share some of this burden. I also am a very pro-immigration person, and this is another area where I break with the right. I think immigrants are always a net positive. I think that we need to expand legal avenues for people to come here. I think we need to make it very simple for people to just come here and work. Citizenship could be considered separately and be a much higher barrier, but making it simple for people to come here and work benefits all of us. And like you said, I think that people do assimilate to our values. They are attracted to coming here because of the things that our values and our ideas have created. And so if you can create pathways for them to come and invest and plant, I don't really have a lot of concerns about that. I think Western values will continue to succeed and will continue to be dominant because they are the best values, and because we can create a society where we share those values even if we do not share similar backgrounds. And ultimately, if you try to get rid of things like individual liberty and you try to trash free market economics, you're the one that's destroying Western values, not the immigrants. So if we actually want to preserve those things, we have to uphold the ideas that created the system we benefit from as is. So I am very pro-immigrants being able to come here and participate in caring for that generation. And I think that that is a very simple solution. But unfortunately, the political chess pieces are lining up against it right now.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to realign at some point. I mean, that's what I say about immigration now. I'm like, okay, fine, round them all up, deport them all. I mean, if you want to do that, but then, okay, do it. And then you're going to have to actually deal with a lot. There's other things that Congress will have to actually deal with, which is, oh, now we have a shortage, and now we need this, and now we need that, and oh, we need to bring these people back in, and we have to have a legal pathway to bring them back in. And it'll showcase how much we actually need immigrants into the country. And so, rip the Band-Aid off, do what you need to do. That way you can expose that you actually do have this need. And then you would be able to assess how much need you actually have, and then maybe control immigration based on that need. But I do think that we do need immigrants. I agree with you. And I think that once we realize we have that need, the narrative will shift, because it has to. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no choice. It'll be so obvious that we have the need for immigrants. Yeah. But right now, it is a push for women to get back into the kitchen. Women stop having educations. Women, no more birth control. No, none of these other things, because you should just be popping out babies. And it is insane. It's insane that they're wanting to create a generation of women who are uneducated and that just pop babies out. And again, like you mentioned, a generation of men that just go around spreading their seed, having a bunch of babies with a bunch of different women, as if, we have an entire culture of people in America, the Black community, who's had fathers ripped away from many of their homes, whether they be their fault or not. And we see the ramifications of not having dads in homes. That's something that we point out, we talk about. We say, that was absolutely devastating to that community. And we need dads. Mm-hmm. Like, they're important. They're kind of important. And we don't want to see There's real consequences to not having dads around. So we don't want that.
Yeah,
or uneducated
you're so
women.
Correct. It's giving Middle Eastern values, right? Like that's what's so crazy to me is when you start talking about pushing women into the home and controlling their choices and not letting them have an education, and you claim that that's to keep the birth rate up to preserve Western values. I mean, you're talking in circles. That's utterly ridiculous. It's really offensive to me, and I think that it's something that more right-wing women need to wake up to, because I think a lot of them are kind of asleep at the wheel, like I have been, because they simply didn't see this as an ongoing threat. And I don't think it really was until the past 10 years. But I think we're seeing a lot of, I personally believe there's a lot of foreign expenditure going on right now when it comes to some of these like gender war items at large that are seeking to divide men and women. And while I think it's astroturfed and there's, a lot of that foreign influence peddling happening, it's nevertheless effective because people do not have media literacy. They're not capable of necessarily seeing through that. And they're getting radicalized by some of these talking points. My husband and I have actually compared algorithms. He's in tech, and he's the one that first noticed this before I was really paying attention to these conversations as they were really gearing up about 3-4 years ago. And he said, have you seen some of these things? He was showing me his Instagram reels and the algorithm, what it was showing him. And it was very anti-women content. And it was really interesting because he was a divorced man. He was, a single dad at that point. And so it sort of had targeted him as somebody who might hate women and who might be very susceptible to these arguments that women are ruining the nuclear family and women are ruining men in courts and they're taking all their money and they're gold diggers. And, fortunately, he's very smart and saw through it. But as he was showing me that, I started getting almost the exact foil to it in my algorithm on more female-driven platforms like TikTok, where all of a sudden I was getting a lot of antinatalist content and women shouldn't get married because it's a patriarchal construct and it's going to ruin your life and you're going to end up being a servant and you should avoid men. It was really extreme stuff. And so I know that these conversations are being driven and it's working. We see men and women increasingly are dividing down partisan lines. We see that relationships aren't forming in the first place. Of course, that's going to lead to an even bigger birth rate decline because people aren't even getting into partnerships in which they could procreate in. So I think this is actually an existential threat for our country if we don't get a hold of it, for women's rights, but also just for our ability to work together, both men and women, to preserve the Constitution and the rule of law and the order that we have. I think there's some intentionality to it. And ultimately, unfortunately, a lot of people on the right now are falling for it. And it's kind of like you observe with Charlie Kirk, going from saying, we just want to stop illegal immigration to all of a sudden the mask falls and now it is legal immigration too. I think the same thing is true with women's rights, where they say, we just want more babies, we just want more people in nuclear families, but then all of a sudden they're talking about repealing the 19th Amendment and blocking women from serving in Congress. And it happens very quickly, and it's the bravado with which they're saying this publicly is what's the most shocking to me, that they don't even feel like this is something that could politically hurt them or culturally hurt them to say publicly.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember always with everything when it comes to rights, they easily disappear. And so we have to always be fighting for our rights. And I know that women have all the same rights as men, but that could easily change. And it often does when you look at the history of various countries. And so we always have to be protecting our rights, just rights in general, free speech rights or right to bear arms, whatever your rights are that you're really focused on, and then individual rights for certain groups of people like women's rights and gay rights or whatever these rights are that have helped us progress to the point we're at. We have to keep fighting for those rights because they will easily disintegrate if we let them disintegrate. There are groups of people who don't want to continue those rights, even though it seems like, oh, they never would do that. Never would they take women's right to vote away. But they would. I mean, if we let them, there are certain groups that absolutely would. So we have to constantly be protecting it. As absurd as that sounds, there was a time when women could not vote, and it wasn't that long ago. So, Hannah, thank you so much for being on. I mean, I think that you're right that there's definitely, and I'm seeing it as well, there's definitely a trend on the right that's sounding as insane as the left was sounding. I mean, the left was sounding really freaking insane. And a lot of us were like, you're freaking, you're really insane. And now the right is starting to sound the same level of insanity, just on different topics. And it's got to be reeled in on. Otherwise, that coalition of people that formed to help elect Donald Trump, that gave him those swing states win, that's going to disappear. That's going to disappear really quickly if they don't actually get figure that out and stop this whole trend. I think a lot of conservative women are starting to talk out about this, though. I'm seeing a lot of it online, a lot of these really conservative women that have been champions of the Republican Party, and they're getting a ton of hate from a lot of these men because they're saying you're not really a trad wife, and you claim you're a trad wife, and here you are working and doing all of this. And a lot of women are starting to, I'm seeing the fighting happen on the right between women and men, unfortunately, which is crazy. So,
Yeah.
eyes wide open. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, I have a mostly male audience, and they've been with me pretty much in lockstep on most things that I've talked about or worked on over the years. And when I first started calling this out, the backlash I got was really significant and shocking. And, you know, Brad is in a lot of my back end and was seeing it too. And he was like, what is this? And it really was a mask off moment for me, where all of a sudden you realize, like, as long as you're compliant and you're going along and you're towing the line and you're kind of standing for, you know, in lockstep with people on the right, then they're your biggest fans.
Yeah.
The minute you start to call out things from within, it's very similar to, I'm sure, what you experience on the left, where all of a sudden you're on the out group and you're cast out, and they really do reveal themselves quite quickly. So I appreciate you elevating this conversation. I think it's important. I think people need to pay attention right when these things first start, before it gets further down the line. We've seen in places like Iran, you know, when my mom was a child, had women's rights, and now they are in burqas and have no ability to fight for themselves or to vote or to get an education. And it's quite bleak. So we have to pay attention immediately when these things begin.
Hannah Cox, thank you so much for being here. We do have links down below for how people can check out your YouTube channel. We also have, what else do we have down there? It looks like your website, your YouTube channel, your X profile. Is there anything else that we should have down there?
That sounds like a good start. They can find me everywhere else from there.
Okay. All right, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks again, Kim.
Hey guys, thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you could check out Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.